Good evening and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at how to create a reusable loading hook in React. And just to recap, this is where we left off in the previous video where we created these skeleton screens using only pure CSS. And what we're seeing here is actually just a CSS class applied to each of these elements. And we have this button here where we can toggle the loading state and the loading will turn off. Now, why are we going to make this into a reusable hook? Well, that's a really great question. And to answer that, we need to understand the pain points of having to do something again and again. And I'll illustrate that in a second. But essentially, hooks allow us to reuse our code in a simple and easy manner. So I don't think I'm going to go any deeper than that right now. I'd much rather just show you the pain points rather than talking about it. So let me just switch over to my editor and I'll give you a little look under the hood here just to see what's going on. So this card component represents each one of these cards that you see here on the front screen. So right now we are saying that if the state is loading, we are going to add a skeleton class. And otherwise, it's going to be an empty string. And this works quite well because we can just apply this to all of the elements. But it has its drawbacks. So what happens when we want to add more classes to customize the styling of each of these elements? So let's say, for instance, that we want to create a title class. So we'll remove this for now and we'll say h1 is going to be card title. And this paragraph is going to be card description. And let's see what else. So this down here, we'll give that a class name of card price. And then let's go into our app CSS or index CSS. We'll go app. And then we'll say card title font size 1.2 rem. We'll say card description. We'll give that a line height of 1.5. And then card price, let's give that a color of green. Just really simple, applying a few styles to this. Now, this is what we have after those changes. And we no longer have our loading class applied if we try to stop and start this loading here. So now we need to do a little bit of extra work to get this to apply. So let's head back to card and we'll go through how we can add this loading class now. So now we can't use a general classes constant anymore because we have different classes for each element. So what we need to do now is we need to say const header classes, and that's going to be loading. If it is loading, we will apply a class of card title and skeleton. Otherwise, we'll apply a class of card title. So that means now we can take this constant and we can substitute the class name for this element. And moving on, we can do the same with a paragraph. So we'll say para or description classes. And we'll say loading. And if it's loading, we'll say card description, which is going to be the base class. And we'll give it the skeleton loading class. Otherwise, we'll just apply the base. and then we'll swap that out. Whoops. Okay. And then finally, we have the card price. So we'll say price classes. And we'll follow the same pattern. So loading, we'll say card price and skeleton. And otherwise, we'll say card price. And now we can change this right here. And this no longer has, we'll remove this. So if we head back, now we can see that we have the loading classes being applied again. So that's good. But we had to do a lot of extra work to make this happen. And we're only editing 3 elements here. But you could easily have a scenario where you have 10 elements that you want to apply this skeleton to, or maybe more. I mean, what do I know? How do you structure your components? The point is, for each element you want to apply this class to, we're adding a lot more work. So how can we take this and try to reduce the amount of work that we have to do? Can we make a general hook that can do this work for us without us having to do this manually each and every time? And that's what we're going to implement right now. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. And we're going to go ahead and create a new file. And we'll say use loading. And let's think about what we want. So we want to have a hook. And this loading hook needs to take in a loading state. So it needs to know whether or not loading is on or off. So as a parameter, we'll take the loading state, and that's going to be a Boolean. And what we want to do is we want to have a reference to an element. And then ideally, we want some kind of interface that can identify which elements that needs to get the loading class applied. And by the way, if you're curious and didn't see the last video, we created a loading class that is basically just this amount of CSS right here. So that's what's creating this shimmering effect on those cards once we apply the skeleton class. What we want to do is have an easy way of applying this class and an interface to map the elements that need the loading state. So basically, if loading is true, find all elements and apply the loading class skeleton. All right, so the first one is quite easy because we get the loading state in here. So that's taken care of. Now, how are we going to find all of these elements? That's going to be the interesting part. So let's go ahead and write this out. First, what we need to do is we need to create a ref. So we need a reference that we are going to use to apply to our parent elements. And I'll explain why once we've written all of this out and have the hook ready for us to use. So just bear with me here and we'll create the ref. It's going to be an, let's say, HTML div element. And that's because we're using TypeScript here, we need to define these what the element is going to be, and we'll import the createRef function from React. That's a React function. If you haven't used refs before, I encourage you to look that up in the documentation. Basically, it's a way for us to reference an HTML element from within the React engine. So React keeps all of its objects in memory, and it's not actual HTML elements, but it's representations of HTML elements that it uses to render to the screen. And the ref gives us a reference to React's model of that element. So hopefully that made sense. So that's going to be this part here. So this is going to be the reference. Now, what we want to do is we want to have a use layout effect here. And that's going to run when the loading state changes, and we'll give it the ref as well. So inside of here, we are going to put code that's going to trigger each time the loading state changes. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to check the current element of the ref. So the reference has a current property, and on that property we have the HTML elements. So what we want to do is we want to use that to get all of the elements that have a data loading property. Okay, so we talked about having a interface to find all our elements, and this is it. This is going to be what we're going to use to identify the elements that need the loading state. So once we have that, we'll go ahead and do a for each, and for each element, we are going to say if loading is true, we'll do element class list add skeleton, else we'll do element class list remove skeleton. Whoops. In code, it's a benefit if you write it correctly. You'll get punished really hard, and the compiler is not going to take it easy on you if you make a mistake. So now we have the contents of this layout effect. And let's just recap. We are getting all the elements with the data loading class, property. And if the state is loading, then we're adding the skeleton loading class. Otherwise, we're removing the skeleton loading class. Right, so we have the two first steps here, actually all of the steps done. Now, all we have to do is return this ref. So we're returning out the reference. Okay, so let's go back to our card. And inside of here, we'll do const ref equals use loading. And we'll import the use loading from, yeah, so we need to export that as well. Forgot that, but no worries. That's done like that, simple. And now we should be able to use loading, and maybe we can get some help from our editor to import. There we go. Now, remember, we are returning out the reference, and the reference is going to be used as the base. So all of the children underneath the reference that we attach the all of the elements that are children of the element that receives this reference will be found. So what that means is if I put the ref here, this element is going to be used as the base for doing query selector all. So that means it will only search the children of this element. All right. So let's go ahead and revert all we did here with these conditional checks and loading classes. And we'll go back to putting the card title here, and we'll put the card description here, and we'll put the card price here. All right. So remember, we have to pass the loading state into this hook because that's what it requires to be able to determine which element is going to have which class. So if we hit save now and go back to our browser, nothing is going to be working yet because we haven't implemented the part where we identify each element. So let's go back and see what we did. We decided that we are going to use this interface right here. So if we add a data loading property to our elements, we should be able to see the loading state being applied. So let's go ahead and try that now. We'll add data loading here, and here, and here. And if we hit save, we are back to where we started. But now we have a reusable interface that we can use over and over again, and we don't have to do these conditional checks, and we can even nest use loading hooks into other components. So we could have a child of this component right here again that uses its own loading state. So let's actually do that right now and see how that could work. So let's create a new component. I'll just call it image. And it's going to be a div. It's going to have a image, and we need to find a image source. Let's find the dog. And get this one. Add the source here. Always add the alt tag, not image, but EMG tag. And then let's add a button here as well. And what we'll do is we'll create a loading, set loading. It's going to be use state false. And on click here is going to set the loading states. So let's do set loading. And we'll do whatever the previous state wasn't. And that's going to be a Boolean. And we'll import use state here. From React. Add the brackets. We'll export the image. And now we need to get our hook. So ref equals use loading. And let's go ahead and pass our loading state into this hook and attach the reference to the top level element here. And we'll go ahead and do data loading on this image. So back in card, we'll put our image here. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like. We'll add some a little bit of styling here. Inside our image, we'll do style with 100%, and we'll do turn on or toggle loading here. And then let's see what we have here. So we have this, but then if we stop this and we toggle loading here, whoops, nothing happened. That's interesting. And that's because we are trying to apply the skeleton class to an image, and it doesn't allow us to, or it doesn't work to have a background color in a JPEG image. So we'll wrap this in a div. We'll put the data loading property on that div. And now if we refresh and head back to our browser and we try to press these buttons, we are able to toggle loading individually on these cards because they have their own loading states. Now, obviously, since they're children of card, if we trigger the loading state of the card itself, it's going to grab that element as well. But we are able to have fine-grained control lower down in our component tree should we wish to only toggle loading for some elements, or maybe if we had a form and we wanted to fill out that form and use the loading state on just a few elements there while we were submitting, that would be something we could do. So it's really flexible like that. And best of all, we avoid a lot of work. So that's it for this video. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was useful to you, and hopefully you can use this to save yourself some work and create some really awesome loading screens in the process. So thanks so much for tuning in. If you liked it, leave a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to get a notification when I post more content. Otherwise, leave a comment below and let me know what I can improve or what you'd like to see. And have a great day.